Thank you for joining the Illinois Environmental Council for our Lunch and Learn series. We hope these sessions will help keep our community connected and informed. We were founded in 1975 by a group of dedicated grassroots environmentalists, and since then, IEC has led issue advocacy campaigns by allowing environmental organizations to pool their resources and create a higher profile for environmental issues. Today, IEC represents more than 100 environmental and community organizations operating in the state of Illinois. If you are not already a member of IEC and are able to give, please consider joining today by using the link in the chat box. On that note, my name is Samira Hanassian, Energy Policy Director with IEC. And I just want to mention a few housekeeping items. All attendees are muted by default. If you joined via Zoom, please use the chat function to ask questions, add comments, or provide resources. Time permitting, we will take live questions at the end of the session. And for those joining by phone, please use *9 to raise your hand. Okay, so for today's session, we are very pleased to have Sylvia Panek from Natural Investments LLC and Melissa Brice of 350 Chicago to speak to fossil fuel divestment in Illinois. To begin, Sylvia, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and background, and I will pass the mic to you.
Of course. Thanks, Samira. My name is Sylvia Panek. I'm a financial advisor here in Chicago with a firm called Natural Investments that specializes in sustainable and socially responsible investing. And I have been working with Melissa at 350 Chicago, serving on this board specifically and working on divestment here in Chicago for several years. So as we were preparing for this presentation, I thought about a podcast that I had listened to last summer on NPR. And despite all the knowledge that I have on climate change issues and divestment, there was something where they talked about how NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, which collects weather information and is what weather reports come from, it mentioned how every 10 years they have to update what the average standards are, because since they've been tracking in the late 1800s, every 10 years or so, they've noticed that the temperature has been rising a few points, whether Celsius or Fahrenheit, however you count it. And so they have to adjust. And I just never had realized that when you hear about average temperatures, that it's something that has to be adjusted every decade or so. And in the report, they had mentioned that since 1980, the rate of increase has more than doubled for us. So it does feel a little bit like the frog in boiling water analogy. And that's something that I'm working to avoid. So part of the reason why I enjoy being and working with 350 Chicago on helping break the grasp that fossil fuels have on our economy and our everyday lives. So, and this is something that it's not just something that our local city chapter here thinks is important. It's something that's actually being addressed around the world, right? So, and it's just a matter of how do we transition in a just way as quickly as possible. So, for today, the conversation, we're going to set it up talking a little bit about the energy sector and the divestment movement in general, as well as how Chicago was able to get the city to divest recently, a big win that we had that we had worked 7 or 8 years for. And then we're going to be rolling into the main part of the discussion, which is our state of Illinois divestment campaign, and Melissa will tackle that. So as many of you may or may not know, fossil fuels are a finite resource, and it's becoming increasingly expensive to extract as the largest pockets of coal and oil and gas have already been tapped. And so as you have to search, you have to go into dig deeper or sift through more, process greater quantities to get a pure source. So, and it's also leading to potentially catastrophic damages for the globe and essentially the human race. So the global fossil fuel divestment movement has seen astronomical growth. So, and if you're taking a look at this chart right here, since 2011, which is when the movement was being tracked on a global level, you can see this sort of exponential growth up until June of 2022. We were at over $15 trillion globally. And institutions that have committed to divesting their assets. So this is something that is making a serious dent and having a serious impact on these multinational fossil fuel energy companies. They've been addressing it in their annual filings that they have to produce at the SEC, and they do mention that this is something that has been affecting their ability to dig and extract more. So for those who may feel like there is no hope, it does exist. And so here's another slide that I wanted to share. The orange line is the energy portion of the S&P 500. So you can see that, even though past performance does not guarantee future performance, there are some indicators that whether it's not just the global divestment movement, but other things have been affecting the profitability of fossil fuel extraction. So, and as I mentioned, there has been a recent rally in oil, and everybody I think is probably aware that the recent geopolitical tensions with the Russian and Ukrainian conflict and the recessionary conditions that we're seeing in the stock market and the US economy and in other places around the world, this has led to an advantageous moment for fossil fuel companies to bump up production, which is pretty typical, and also increase share prices and increase oil prices in a way that wasn't even necessarily seen 15 years ago when we had the last financial collapse or the previous financial collapse. So I think that they're seeing the writing on the wall with investors not wanting to put money into fossil fuels. And so while we're having this temporary setback, they are taking advantage by increasing prices because they can. In order to sort of secure financing for future drilling and extraction and processing. So it's just a reminder of how important the work continues to still be for our movement here at 350 Chicago. Something a little bit more optimistic is that the cost of renewable energy, producing it, has plummeted and made it much more competitive. And fossil fuels are now more expensive, but because they're so entrenched in our everyday life, it has been difficult to wean off. So this is where it's important for us to consider still putting pressure on not financing essentially the global destruction that we're anticipating if we don't get a handle on this and keep carbon reserves in the ground. So couple of things here from some noted think tanks and financial institutions around the world, BlackRock being one of the biggest, and excuse the double negative, where divestment is not only not risky, but it is financially sound. This is, something to take with a grain of salt, BlackRock still being one of the largest financiers of fossil fuels. So, but with having them signal that they're willing to focus attention in the boardroom, company engagement, in the transition, this is something where it's important for us to still have our voices heard, I feel, from a grassroots level and an institutional level here locally. In Illinois, there is power. We have a lot of money in the state. And it's why we continue to have this campaign that we are working on. And with some success, we're taking it to the state level. So I'll pass it on to Melissa, who is the founder of 350 Chicago, and she can give you a little bit more backstory of what the organization has been doing.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. As Sylvia said, I helped to found the local chapter of 350 in May of 2013. 350 is a global grassroots movement to solve the climate crisis. So they operate on every country. The number 350 represents a safe level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. NASA climate scientists have studied this and found that we need to be below 350 parts per million. We are currently over 400, so we need to reverse that number, which oftentimes you'll see a backwards arrow in the 350 logo, and that's what that is representing. In Chicago, we focused on fossil fuel divestment. So in 2014, we began doing a lot of research. We called on 350 National to help us, local 350 groups like Madison, who are ahead of the game, had already divested. And we did a ton of research to see what's the financial argument, the moral argument, the political argument to influence the city to divest from fossil fuels. So what we were asking for is that the city no longer invest in new fossil fuel stocks and bonds, and to unwind any current holdings within 5 years. The first alderman we met with was Scott Waguespack, and that was in 2016. And at that time, he put us in touch with the Progressive Caucus communications director and his legislative aide, and we were able to draft up a resolution. And then Alderman Arena took it in his hands and really spearheaded it and got 40 aldermen to sign on to the resolution at a city council meeting where we introduced it. Unfortunately, the resolution never came to a vote. So we tried again in 2018, where we introduced a second resolution, immediately followed by an ordinance, because we had started to meet with Treasurer Summers' office, and Treasurer Summers was already working on environmental, social, good governance investing within the city and was totally on board with divestment. He just wanted to see, like, what can we reinvest our money in from an environmental perspective. Unfortunately, that ordinance also and resolution never came to a vote before the time that Mayor Emanuel went out of office. So we had to start over basically in reintroducing. So Maria Haddon was one of our chief sponsors from the beginning. And then we got Daniel Laspada and Alderman Cardenas on board as well. And through their offices, we were able to then meet with the treasurer, and working with Treasurer Conyers Irvin. She was on board from the beginning as well. Their office was very instrumental. And they even did beyond our ask. We were asking to divest from the top 200 oil, coal, and natural gas companies, but they went ahead and did the MSI list to 225. So as of today, an ordinance has passed, and the city has actually already unwound its holding in the top 225 fossil fuel companies. And those companies are based on the companies that have the most amount of reserves they plan to burn. We cannot burn all those reserves because we will reach 6 degrees of global warming if we do. So 80% of known fossil fuel reserves need to stay below ground to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. So we're very happy with our victory in March. I guess I went ahead of myself a little bit, but yeah, so on March 23rd, we were able to pass an ordinance, and so the city is now divested from fossil fuels. Moving on to the state level, since we won that campaign after years of hard work, we wanted to take that momentum and bring it on to the state. So we have launched a state campaign. And Sylvia, if you can advance to the next slide. I want to share a little bit more in detail about the divestment movement. So one action the state of Illinois can take is to divest its pension funds from fossil fuels. Sorry, I should have mentioned before, for Chicago, we divested the operational budget. So they have about $8 billion of money in the operational budget. We didn't do anything regarding the pension funds at that time. The pension funds are governed by the state. So now at the state level, we are asking for the state to divest its pension funds, and we're still investigating. Probably we might do some other, if the state has any operational budget or things like that, but definitely focusing on the pension funds. The divestment movement began 11 years ago on college campuses and has spread, as I mentioned, to governments, faith-based organizations, and foundations. And recently, the founder of 350.org, Bill McKibben, who's also, author, activist, professor at Middlebury College in Vermont, he recently wrote an article about the effectiveness of this divestment movement, which now has 1,500 institutions divesting, with a total value of all institutions placed at $40 trillion. So this is a very strong movement. And fossil fuel companies are feeling the pressure. Shell acknowledged in its annual report that rising climate change concerns and the success of the fossil fuel divestment movement could lead to project delays or cancellations, a decrease in demand for fossil fuels, and an inability to access capital. Chevron similarly acknowledged the negative impact of climate litigations and policy regulations on the company's financial operations and overall business model. In 2018, analysts at Goldman Sachs said, quote, "The divestment movement has been a key driver of the coal sector's 60% derating over the past 5 years," unquote. Peabody is the world's largest private sector coal company in the world, and revealed among its reasons for filing bankruptcy was the divestment drive, which hindered its ability to raise capital. So we're really excited to see this divestment moving into state level. So Maine, New York have already passed divestment legislation, and California is working on legislation as well. New York actually announced it would divest its $225 billion common retirement fund from fossil fuels. And so we feel like divestment is in harmony with fiduciary duty, and there's different, powerful people quoting that here. So one thing we hear from when we're speaking with legislators, or we've already spoken with the Treasurer's Office of the state, they talk about fiduciary duty and they talk about shareholder engagement. So for shareholder engagement, we have really good counter arguments to that. We feel like one, the SEC does not recognize. So for a shareholder engagement, someone might say, we have stock in this company. We can go to a board meeting and we can advocate from the inside for a company to change its ways. That doesn't work with fossil fuel companies and getting them to stop fossil fuels is because that's their core business model, and not recognize resolutions that inhibit the core business of a company. So we feel like a shareholder resolution won't work for that reason. And also the timeline for engagement is too slow. Just last summer, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said that we need to decarbonize the world by 2050. And so we only have 25 years to do that. Also, engagement has no track record of success on this issue. There have been no significant direct reductions in the production of fossil fuels achieved through shareholder advocacy. And lastly, if we really can't convince the state to not do shareholder advocacy, then they can divest, hold on to $2,000 worth of a company for 1 year, and then you are eligible to file a shareholder proposal. So we would say divest all but $2,000 worth. So that's a little bit detail about the movement. What we're doing here in Chicago is we do have a campaign that we launched in April of last year. We have a bill which has been reviewed. Thank you to the IEC. They reviewed that. And our Monday meeting on July 11th, we're going to review those comments and get that more polished up. We've already met with Senator Fine and Representative Gable's office, and Senator Fine is really interested in being a main sponsor for the bill. So we're in the process of meeting with more and more legislators, and we are continuing to do research and power build for this campaign. We're going to do some GIS work where we met for CJA in the state, see which counties those are, which districts, and see where we want to put our resources and try to build this movement. We're also meeting with different people in unions and with various organizations. So we're really at the stage where we're getting our legislation underway, starting to socialize this with legislators, and building up power. Next, we would love it if you all would want to join our campaign. So there are various ways to do that. One is that we meet every other Monday night. As I mentioned, our next meeting is on July 11th. We meet at 7:30 p.m. via Zoom. So if you're interested in joining our meetings, we would definitely welcome you. You can also endorse our campaign. I will drop a link in the chat to our sign-on letter. So you can sign on as an individual, you can sign on behalf of an organization, but then we have a running list of everyone who supports our campaign, and we can bring that to meetings with legislators. Also on that endorsement letter, you can sign up if you want to get more involved. We have various levels of commitment, and you can just check some boxes on the form. Also, if you're willing to reach out to your legislator, it's always better if they can hear from a constituent, so we can join you in those meetings to socialize the bill to them and ask them for their support. So if you're interested in meeting with your legislator, please let us know, and we would join you in that. And the
I would
next,
just throw in there, following up on Melissa's wonderful comment, is that with 350 Chicago, we're pretty well connected with the northern part of the state, and that we're really looking for people in central Illinois, southern Illinois, other parts of the state, who are in touch with their legislators or local environmental groups who'd be interested in joining. That's, I think, where we can get some of our biggest gains and biggest traction, I feel like.
absolutely. Thank you, Sylvia. And also, we feel like the divestment campaign fits in with the state legislation that's passed already. So the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, that we feel like there's lots of harmony in those. So the CJA bill supports job equity and renewable energy economy by shifting investments directly to renewable energy. Divestment will hopefully do that as well. You know, we'll be taking money away from fossil fuels. We've read and heard about how fossil fuel companies are having a harder time raising capital because of that. So that can shift to renewable energy as well. So I feel like there's synergy there. The CJA supports a just transition to renewable energy by mitigating potential economic crisis brought on by the carbon bubble. And we also don't want to be left with those stranded assets in our pension funds as well. So there's synergy there. We also feel the timing is right to divest. Sylvia went through the financial argument, but we also are going to be putting $41 million provided to former fossil fuel companies and workers to support a just transition through CJA. And lastly, it supports the state's transition to 100% carbon-free power sector in the interest of environmental justice communities. So we're really asking to just expound on the great work of CJA through fossil fuel divestment from the state pension funds. So I know we went through that kind of quickly, but we're happy to answer any questions you all might have.
We're hoping that there are many. We're looking forward to having a conversation while people are taking their lunch breaks here.
I did see one in the chat from Tessa. So if the state pension divested, that would apply to all Illinois municipal pensions, such as Chicago and surrounding suburbs. Yeah, that is the goal. We have stated the 6 pension funds, of which the municipal is one. And so the Illinois law also governs the Chicago pension funds as well. So yes, it would be included.
Thank you for that. If anyone has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or we ask that you use the raise your hand function if you would like to verbalize your question. Looks like Tessa asked another question here. What sorts of negative feedback has divesting received from your experience, and how do you respond to these concerns?
I would say that oftentimes one of the arguments is, well, if you sell, somebody else is going to buy those shares, right? And then when you have share price increases now, like we're seeing where fossil fuel stocks are doing pretty well despite everything else going more on a downward trend, you know, a lot of that is so far that's temporary and cyclical, as well as you know, we do expect it to be difficult to continue extracting more regulation as more leaders come into the space and realize that there just needs to be more of a transition into renewable energies instead. And so the sector is going through drastic changes, and this is this recent increase, I feel like, is really it's that desperate last grab to garner as much cash to continue operations and continue slow walking their transition, because it's been a great and stable business for them. So if you want to continue financing that, that's, you know, questionable. What we've seen is when you do portfolio modeling, you take the fossil fuel sector out, you can still have great returns overall. So those tend to be some of the responses that we get to people saying, well, why should I sell if other people will just buy and make money off of it?
Yeah, and one thing we heard a lot in Chicago as well is, okay, if we divest, where else will we put the money? They wanted to know, like, what would be good for the environment. And so, you know, 350 Chicago can't give financial advice like that, but there are companies out there, third-party companies that do that work, such as Sustainalytics. So I know the city engaged with them to see like, where should we put our money that will have a positive impact on climate change. And one other thing I will say too is a negative to divesting we hear from, like I mentioned, from the treasurer's office is shareholder engagement, where like they wouldn't be able to convince fossil fuel companies to start investing in renewable energy. And that's when we go into those points that we talked about before.
Okay, great. Art asked a question and may need clarification, but what do you recommend for individual investors who have a 501c3 plan, et cetera?
I think 501c3 refers to nonprofit organizations that exist in the tax code. But so it's probably more like 403b or 401ks that Art was referring to. And with that, your employer, so whether it's the university or nonprofit or a for-profit company, they will choose a plan administrator who puts together the list of investments that you have to choose from while you're employed there. And so really your hands are a bit tied. And you then have to go and engage with your HR director and executive branch of your company to work with the plan administrator to offer more sustainable and socially responsible options. I do know from my work that Green America is a nonprofit where they have a section of their website and they talk about sustainable and responsible investing. And they have a toolkit as to how you can engage with your company to try to get them to offer a more sustainable 401k plan for you to choose from. Otherwise, when you're no longer employed there, you are able to remove your money from their management and roll it over either to your next employer who might have a better one or into a rollover IRA, individual retirement account, where you can manage it yourself. And you can go to resources such as fossilfreefunds.org. Here, I'm going to put that in the chat, fossilfreefunds.org, to look at mutual funds that you could choose from that are fossil fuel free to put together your own IRA, or you find an advisor who is knowledgeable and can manage it for you.
And I haven't been on this website recently. I just checked to see it's still active, but there's a website called asyousow.org where you can check, you can put in your mutual funds and see how much is invested in fossil fuels. So you can also take a snapshot of what your portfolio looks like.
Yeah, actually, As You Sow runs fossilfreefunds.org.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah, and they also have other sleeves, other issue areas that you can take a look at if you're interested in them, such as no guns, no deforestation, gender equity, and such forth. But of course, our main conversation here is about new fossil fuels.
Okay, great. And Art did clarify 401ks is what he was referring to. Any other questions? Not seeing any so far. All right.
Maybe Samira, would you be able to talk a little bit more? I know that your position at IEC is new, or not the position, but you've just come on, but what are your plans as Energy Policy Director in terms of what you're seeing and where you think IEC is going with advocacy?
That's a great question. So in my role, I'm primarily focused on CEJA implementation work, directly aligned with the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. And so the focus is state level. I'm really excited that 350 is working on, well, 350 Chicago is working at the state level as well on this divestment campaign. And I'm excited that IEC has an eye towards that legal language. So hopefully, we can support you in that work moving forward. But in my case, very much aligned with the just transition, moving the state to clean and renewable energy sources, and everything under that umbrella. So hopefully we'll be able to host more of these lunch and learns and information sessions on all of that. But fortunately, IEC has a whole slew of Climate and Equity Jobs Act webinars for folks to reference. Maybe we can drop that in the chat for folks. Oh yeah, so Marcela's asking if we can provide links to investment info resources. I think we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if anyone has any questions about our campaign specifically, we are hoping to get this legislation introduced in 2023, so the next legislative session. So we have kind of a faster timeline. So if anyone's interested in getting involved, definitely let me know. And then actually, let me pull up really quick the investment form or the endorsement form and drop it in the chat.
And I just found the Great America resource on engaging your employer on your 401k plan. I'll drop that in the link for you. Something that I'll mention with the fossil-free funds while Melissa's finding her link is that I just saw an announcement yesterday that they have expanded, and they also now rate mutual funds, not only as to whether they're invested directly in fossil fuel companies in the fund or the ETF, but they're also now rating and looking at whether they are invested in banks and insurance companies that finance fossil fuels or insure them. And so another way and another lens of looking at where your money is going and trying to starve the beast as much as possible, so to speak. Oh, wow, that was, I don't know if anybody can pick that up, but there was like a rumble that came from somebody maybe sliding in a chair. It sounded like a beast growling.
Oh, sorry, I think it was the L going by my house. I live right across from the L.
Oh, that was a great segue.
All right. I do not see any hands raised. So at last call for questions. And if not, folks are going to get a lot of time left in their lunch break.
Either that or they're signing up and we're going to be seeing them on Monday, July 11th. So we're really excited for the work that's going to come ahead.
Thank you everyone for your time. We appreciate it.
Okay, so on that note, yeah, thank you for joining IUC for our Lunch and Learn, Divesting from Fossil Fuels in Illinois. Recordings of each session in the Lunch and Learn series can be found on IUC's YouTube page or channel and our website. I think Paloma will be dropping some stuff down in the chat. Yep, thank you, Paloma. And again, if you're not already a member of IUC and are able to give, please consider joining today by using the link in the chat box. I think Paloma dropped it early on in the session. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that our next Lunch and Learn is next Tuesday on July 12th on the Vote Yes campaign and a comprehensive history of the Cook County Forest Preserves. So we hope to see you then, and you can register at the link that Paloma also provided in the chat. So thank you everyone so much.
Thank you, Samira, for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.